We're going to go over the drift and the silence.
The material on this tape was excerpted from a seminar led by Werner Erhard, where he works with participants to develop the distinctions of effective action and accomplishment.
I want to introduce a distinction, still in the domain of being. I want to introduce the distinction called silence, the silence, or the drift. Sometimes I'll mean the silence and sometimes I'll mean the drift. I want to take away the whole world of language. And I want you to see in a very powerful, profound way, there would be this enormous silence. There would be no stones, no rocks, and no ocean, and no water, and no mountains. Certainly there would be no people, but, I mean, literally, there wouldn't be anything like a person. But you see, a rock is a rock in the domain of language. What is it if there's no language? No observing, because observing is a phenomenon of interpretation in the domain of language. Observing. What allows the artist to see something on the palette that you and I can't see is that the artist has distinctions in the domain of language, not words. The artist has distinctions in the domain of language such that colors show up that might not show up for us. Same for the musician. Same for the man or woman who runs a house. Same for the man or woman who runs a laboratory. Scientists see things that other people don't see because they have this faculty of observation. Not eyes. Everybody's got eyes. You take me into a laboratory, I got eyes too. I can't see what the scientist sees. I got a brain, I can't see what the scientist sees. What I lack are distinctions in the domain of language with which to see what the scientist sees. So observation is gone. No intention, no commitment, no beauty, no suffering, no love, not in the world of silence. That's all gone. Almost unimaginable, but kind of, I don't know, you can kind of get like maybe a little sense of it. So I want to have this distinction called silence. Now I want to have another distinction called the drift. The drift allows for language and intention and love and risk and all that good stuff. And the bad stuff. But it has the quality of a boat in the water with no rudder and no sails. Now, when you put a boat in the water, it doesn't stay still, it moves. Some ninny on the shore might say, boy, there's a lot of intention in that boat. But really what there is in the boat is drift. So I want to invent this distinction for ourselves called the drift. You and I are drifting. Life is drifting. The world is drifting. Humanity is drifting. The United States is drifting. This hemisphere is drifting. There is a certain drift. And there's no distinction called the drift. So there's this enormous body of superstition about accomplishment and failure, which has nothing whatsoever to do with accomplishment or failure. It's merely the drift. If we took you out, life would go on. The world would go on. When you're asleep, things are still going on. For you, that's all the drift. People want to take credit because the sun came up in the morning. That's insane. There is no accomplishment in a rising sun. There may be beauty and may symbolize hope and then whatever you want, but there ain't no accomplishment in that. Not for you. No, you and I in the world of accomplishment do not have any distinction called the drift. And so we have this sense of accomplishment and failure in a massive arena over which we have zero impact. Now, I want you to see that in many ways you are a drift for yourself. You have a certain drift. The tide comes in, you go this way. The tide goes out, you go that way. So in many ways, even you yourself are part of the drift for you yourself. I want to nail this drift thing. I want you to know that you're struggling and efforting over the sun should rise this morning. This is insane. So I want you to see that we live in a sea of drifting. And accomplishment is not that which occurs by the drift, nor is failure that which occurs by the drift. When you initiate a project, that's not drifting, that's creating. But the project begins to drift the instant you create it. It starts to have a drift of its own. Yeah, you built the boat and launched it, but as soon as it went in the water, it started to drift. So there is this drift. And I want to nail that there is a drift. That if you leave everything alone, it'll tend to go in a certain direction. Is that clear for people? Now the question is, how do you impact the drift? There's nothing you can do about the drift, is there? It drifts. The boat drifts. You know, it floats. It goes like this, and when the tide goes out, it goes this way. When the tide comes in, it goes this way, and goes back and forth, and sometimes it gets so far out, it gets out of the way of the tide, and it can't get back in, and then it drifts out in the ocean, and the waves get big, and it goes up and down, but it's just drifting. Lots of action. By the way, that's the thing you need to know. I didn't mention that. When things are drifting, there could be an enormous amount of action. Lots of your most action-y actions are part of the drift. Now, my question is, I don't know about your question, but my question is, what impacts the drift? When I'm considering the distinction accomplishment, my question is, what impacts the drift? So that's the question. What impacts the drift? Yes?
I'd say it's the free choice of commitment.
Okay, now look, I want you to be real clear about something, Claudia. That what you gave is a intelligent, sensible answer. And I'm going to attack it brutally.
Go ahead.
So I don't want you to feel like I'm attacking you because you're not an intelligent, sensitive woman. I'm attacking it because I want to kill that culture. You stand on the shore with a mighty commitment to alter the drift of that sailboat or that great ship of state, as Bucky called it. Nothing happens.
True.
It keeps on drifting. Commitment doesn't alter the drift. But you got a lot. Claudia, thank you. But, because I'm going to get even worse and I don't want you to be the target. Really, I want you to see how much voodoo there is in this culture. People saying, my commitment, that's what made it happen. Your commitment makes nothing happen. Zero. Never. No, not. Nothing. The drift of the ship is not impacted by your commitment or your stand or your feelings, no matter how deeply heartfelt. Or anything else. Only one thing impacts the drift. Now, if this one drifts into that one, they impact each other, but that's all a part of the drift, yes? So I'm not talking about when the two ships collide. That's all a part of the drift. But really, what impacts the drift which your life is, the drift which life is, the drift which your family is, the drift which your relationships drift. They've got a life of their own. Projects drift. They've got a life of their own. Life drifts. What impact? The drift is no accomplishment. If the boat drifts into the slip and the wind blows the lines around the cleats and ties it up, you don't have any accomplishment for having docked the boat. If the boat drifts past the rocks, you have no accomplishment for keeping the boat off the rocks. Now, it's true, okay, you push the boat to give it a start. But for there on after, it's a drift, isn't it? It's really now part of the drift. It's like Catherine said, yes, you create the project, but then it begins to have a drift of its own. True, it wouldn't be drifting at all if you hadn't shoved it, analogously. But it begins to drift. The question is, what impacts the drift? John?
What impacts
Jan, yes, sorry.
the ship is a tugboat.
Okay, I need a non-analogous. But wait, let's take what Jan said. He said, what impacts if it's a ship, what impacts the ship is a tugboat. Yes, if the tugboat isn't part of the drift, and no, if it is. In other words, there's a certain drift in shipping, isn't there, Jan, called tugboats. And they seem to show up when ships come into the harbor. And there's a certain drift about that. And that's all kind of set up and it drifts on in that way. Listen, suppose who you are as a manager. Suppose your job is to manage something. You can take no credit for the fact that the tugboat shows up at the liner at the right moment. That was all part of the drift. That's all part of the setup. Now, if you need the tugboat outside the gate where they don't ever have tugboats, and you somehow can make that happen when it wasn't going to happen anyhow, that impacts the ship. But what are we talking about, Rob? Please.
It looks to me like there's two components. One is action. It takes action.
Okay, now let's get that component flat first, because I think that one's pretty clear.
Okay.
What impacts the drift is action. Maybe not any old action, because the tugboat that was already a part of the system that was going to happen anyhow, and did happen because it was going to happen anyhow. See, the farmer can't take any credit for the action of the sun on the sea. There's no accomplishment in the action of the sun on the sea. There's no accomplishment in the action of the sun on the seed. Is that clear? So it's not just any old action, it's a certain kind of action, but certainly action impacts the drift. That impacts the drift.
Yeah, so action, but there's and I don't have my finger on it, but there's some subtle distinction about a consciously created action, a human being in action.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was just noticing for myself all the accomplishments in my life. So many of them are just the drift.
Yeah.
You know, that's how it would have
Hold on
turned
for
out.
just a second. You look, this is an enormous opportunity to really see how much of the successes and failures, the accomplishments and the failures in your life are really a part of the drift. Damn near all of our everydayness is the drift. Go ahead, beautiful.
Yeah, and beyond that, even a lot of the things that I've done that I've considered to be extraordinary are part of the drift.
Yeah, beautiful. Look,
You know,
this is
it's
a guy born with talent. He's going to drift into extraordinary action. I mean, when a 740, you ever see you get up close to a 747 when it takes off. That's an accomplishment, man. But not really. It's part of the drift. You drift something designed like that at a certain speed down a runway, it'll take off. There's no accomplishment in its taking off. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, I wrote you about my trip to the Caribbean. I noticed this for the first time just a couple months ago when I went to the Caribbean, and outside of my frame of reference, which is similar to Robert's deadlines and things to produce, that, here's an entire culture of people who drink Heineken beer, sit on the beach, and take care of their families. And stepping out of this culture, which is commitment and fast-paced and everything, I just noticed that's the drift there, and this is the drift here. And it doesn't make me more accomplished than the guy who sits on the beach and drinks beer every day.
Look, that's beautiful. That's the best one I can think of. See, there's this true false notion about sitting on the beach, taking care of your family is an accomplishment. No, building a city's an accomplishment. No, sitting on the beach. Nonsense. None of it's an accomplishment. Caribbean islanders drift in the way in which they drift, and people in the United States drift in the way in which they drift. Neither are an accomplishment, and there is no quality of accomplishment in either except in the stupid arguments.
Interestingly, Werner, since I came back, I just noticed that, I was living in despair every day, highly accomplished, very successful, but always pushing, always pushing for the next job, pushing to have people know who I am, know how great I am, that whole thing about how I'm known in the world. And I came back and I saw how stupid that was. And it's been difficult for me to articulate it, because if you tell somebody, in a normal conversation that what you're doing to forward the action is in my case, to be a photographer and not be out there leaning on the door the whole time. And yet I've accomplished since I got back more than the period before I left, and seemingly with no effort. I mean, it's just been really clear to me that this drift it's all pervasive.
Yeah,
So
very good.
That's it. Yeah.
Now, Rob really covered the waterfront there for me. He nailed the thing. So there is this drift, and what impacts the drift is action. But not any old action, because the action of the sun on the seed is not an accomplishment for the farmer. But as Rob points out, there's a certain action, I don't know, kind of like intentional action, but not if the intentional action comes out of the culture which you are, that drives you and shapes you. But something like intentional action, and I don't know, something like that. Well, we're going to look into that a little bit more deeply in a moment. At any rate, you nailed it beautifully. And the first thing to get clear about is that only action impacts the drift, nothing else. Richard?
So you're asking what is it that impacts the boat, right?
The drift.
Oh, so
It's not quite what impacts the boat, it's what impacts the drift.
yeah, because that's what I'm trying to see. Are you talking about what will move the boat in spite of the drift?
Yeah.
Or what will actually impact the drift in which the boat is apart?
Yeah.
See,
Really the second. But the first is fine.
okay.
Whichever one's easiest for the moment.
Well, what would you say to this? That action affects the boat in spite of the drift it's in, and context affects...
Yeah, good. I wanted to get that. I'm glad you brought that up. Richard, let us call the current the context of the drift. Okay? How do you impact the current? Let me tell you a way to impact the current. You build a dam, and that impacts the current. Okay? That's one of the ways to impact the current. You can stop the current by building a dam. You can also impact the current by building a shape that looks like this, and that'll take the current rushing this way and send it back that way, at least for a period of time until the current, it'll create an eddy. Okay? Lots of ways to, probably 1,000 other ways to impact the current, but they all are action. So, your distinction is a totally valid distinction. The distinction between the object identified and the box the object comes in. The distinction between the context and the content. But it's as true for context as it is for content in terms of impacting the drift. One impacts the drift of content by an action which either impacts the boat, the object, the content, or an action which impacts an action which impacts the context or the box in which the object comes. But in both cases, it's an action.
Well, I think I remember you saying context is not about efforting. It's not about, going out and taking a hammer and hitting a nail into a board. It is a existential act.
Notice the word act.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I don't move when I'm doing it. When I said, okay,
now hold on for a second. Just bear with me, and I think I got your question, and I think I can shed some light into the arena. An act in the domain of content is different than an act in the domain of context. What constitutes an act in the domain of context is different than what constitutes an act in the domain of content. Okay? That's number one. Number two, blackboard. In that word, there is like no action. There's no, let me do it differently. Running. In that word, there's no action. It's a description of an action, yes? But it itself is not an action, kind of. The word running is not itself an action. But how about the word promise in the following? I promise Catherine to deal with the issue that she brought up before the end of the seminar. Can you see that in that saying is action itself? I'm not talking about a promise. I am promising. So I promise is an action in a different domain than the domain of running, but nevertheless an action, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me tell you what the action is in the domain of context. The action is bringing forth, and to put it a little bit more precisely, bringing forth distinction. One acts in the domain of context. Acts. Just like promise is an action, and like running is an action, bringing forth a distinction, creating a distinction is an action in the domain of context. Now, does that clear that up?
Yeah.
Good. Very useful. Thank you very much. Okay, we're moving towards the punchline here. We've got that there is this drift. Then we've got that the way you impact the drift is with action. Now we want to know, how do you impact action? What impacts action? I don't want to know about the drifting part of your action. I want to know not about the action which is inevitable, not about the action which is part of the drift, but about the action which is not a part of the drift. How do you impact action? Roberta? Okay, Roberta says you take a stand. Now, I want to invite you to examine that, because while I know that many of you have altered your actions by taking a stand, that may not be the distinction you need to really master that arena. There may be something about taking a stand that where the real impact on action is. See, for instance, now, I just impacted your action, yeah? In other words, I generated a whole body of action over in that seat, didn't I? Yeah. And you generated a whole body of action up here on this platform, didn't you? And what generated the action? Somebody will say, because I threw an ashtray. Well, because I threw an ashtray at her, I did not. I made sure it didn't get at her. Made sure it went over Colette's head, Colette. No, somehow, and besides which, she didn't choose one of those movements. Because only a nut would throw a heavy ashtray into an audience. No way, it's Roberta, yeah? No way Roberta could sit there and say, no, he's going to throw an ashtray, and when he does, I'm going to put my arms out. No! All of the action in that seat over there, and it was really beautifully organized. You know, a very complex set of actions to get underneath that ashtray and grab it. Beautifully organized and orchestrated, and each one put in perfect sync. And everything brought together beautifully was all a product of the in-the-worldness. There's this in-the-worldness called an ashtray, and it organizes behavior. Behavior is a product of in the world. The drift is impacted by action, and action is impacted by one's in the worldness. Now, what impacts your in the worldness? Getting hairy now, right? Medwin?
What impacts in the worldness is what I've experienced, what I've had happen to me.
Okay, not bad. Very, very good. Beautiful. So he's saying, and I'm going to put words in your mouth here, so you have to clean it up if you don't like it. He's saying that the world kind of shows up in a particular way. It has certain characteristics, certain color, certain shape, certain meaning for me. And that's all predicated on my past experiences. Yeah?
Yeah, what has happened, yeah.
Yeah, what has happened to you in the past shapes the showing up, the in-the-worldness of the present, yes?
Yes.
And your actions are correlated to your present in the worldness. Roberta's not reaching out to the ashtray now.
No.
Okay, so I think that that's dead on. That for the most part, people are living into the past. Because for most of us, our future is created by the past. The options of the future are the experiences of the past. So as Medwin says, at least to some degree, the showing up is impacted by the past. You give me give two guys who are pretty much the same, two different sets of experiences, and they're likely to act in two different ways because the world shows up for them in different ways. Yeah?
Yeah.
Good enough.
Things have happened.
Good. Except that your past is part of the drift. So we're only talking about actions that are not a part of the drift. Therefore, we're only talking about the showing up that isn't part of the drift, and your past is part of your drift. So the world's showing upness, Pat, the world's showing upness when you're in the worldness is a product of the past. That's part of the drift. That's drifting. Pat?
The difficulty I have with this is when we have this kind of discussion, one of the few places I have to go is my head. And I just don't get the answers there.
Yes.
And what I do is I take what you say and then I try and put it in my life, which is in the world.
Yes.
That's my in the worldness. And what I notice is the only place I can test this stuff out.
Hold on one second. I hope you listened to what she said. That was actually brilliant. It was so smooth, I didn't catch it at first. I mean, really brilliant. That none of this is any good when you resolve it in your head. The place to resolve it is in the world. Put it in the world. That's the people who get real value out of participating in the work, are the people who are willing to put it in the world. Please, Pat, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
So when I put it in the world, somehow it comes out just almost exactly the opposite way you're saying it. For me, for example, I've been playing around with exercising forever, trying to exercise.
Right.
And in the last 2 months, what I've noticed is that it is not even that I like to get on the bike any better, but I've noticed if I get on the bike in the morning for 15 to 30 minutes, my day shows up. My day shows up differently.
Yeah, you have impacted the day with an action called riding the bike.
But I've impacted the showing up of the day.
Yeah.
But that's not the showing up impacting the action. It's the action impacting the showing up.
Yeah.
So it may be that you got that.
Okay, not bad, but let's take a look at something. The action which I want to isolate the source of is the getting on the bike. What puts you on the bike? Not the decision to get on the bike. You've tried that 1,000 times. Not the discipline to get on the bike. You've tried that. Not the ought to, should, need to, all that stuff. There's somehow a shift in the showing up. There's something shifted.
Right.
In order for you to be on the bike.
There's two things that come up when you ask that question. One is, it's not, if I get on the bike 3 months, 6 months from now, I'll be skinny. It's today will shift. Now
today, listen, hold it now. Listen, this is
now shift.
This is a pretty powerful insight. A lot of people fussing around with their weight and smoking and Now, Pat knows that if she does that, she's always known that if she exercises for 3 months, her weight will probably go down. That never got on there on the bike. She's saying she shifted to showing up so that the getting on the bike has an impact today. She shifted the in the worldness of being on the bike to an impact today. And she says that shifting of that in the worldness gets her on the bike. Not bad. That's a hell of an opening. Do you understand that I'm not saying that that's true, what Pat says, that that's the recipe for doing exercise? I'm saying that it's a valid domain of inquiry, that that's worth inquiring into, what you just opened up for us. Brilliant. Go ahead. What's the other one?
The other one is my commitment to this working with you. So if I know that in my head isn't the place to go, and if I sit through these seminars and keep thinking that I'm supposed to figure something out or realize something that makes a difference, my commitment is in the work and in the work, in the below the line,
right,
in the trying it out, in the figuring out, seeing how it's going to work in the context of team, how it's going to work in my life.
Yeah, brilliant.
That's sort of my half of the bargain, and I have a commitment to that bargain.
Dynamite. Very, very useful. Okay, look. What impacts the showing up is the clearing for that which shows up. You can't reorganize the world in some Pollyanna positive thinking way. That doesn't alter the showing up. It says that things are lousy and you speak positively about them. Things aren't lousy. Why do you need to have positive thinking? Why not just think straight if things aren't lousy? Things are good, you think straight, you don't think positively. So in this quick survey, I'm inviting you to see that the clearing determines the quality of what shows up in the clearing. You can impact the world as it's a correlate for your action, which actions, as Pat points out, then impact the world, impact the drift, by having something to do with the clearing which you are. I invite you to consider the possibility that accomplishment is that impact of the drift which you created in language, wherein the drift was impacted by a shift in the clearing, a shift in who you are such that the world showed up so that your actions changed in such a way that they impacted the drift so that what you were committed to in the beginning got accomplished. Now, there's a whole part of that I left out that I brought out in commitment, and that was if it don't happen in the world, it ain't an accomplishment. Something private, something kept to yourself, something not made public is never an accomplishment. Now, you can be your own public. So accomplishment takes you out into the world. Now, if you make a promise and it constrains you, what the kind of behavior you're going to get is behavior as good as you can get constrained. In other words, constrained behavior has a certain value. Don't go in the street, you say to your child. That constrained behavior has a certain value. Don't let the little sucker make up his own mind. Tell him, don't go in the street. It's better that way than if he makes up his own mind. By the same token, if much of your project is action derived from the constraint of promise, then you and I both know that that action is not going to impact the drift in the way we want it to impact the drift. Okay. I have this distinction, which I call an opening for action, as distinct from a constraint for action. Some people are able to promise, and Liz pointed out that from time to time she's able to promise, and I've seen it with her because she and I have worked together, where the promise becomes this enormous opening for action. It frees her to act. And I'll tell you, when you get to that level of function, you've gotten to a very powerful level of function. Most of us are not there, and even those of us who are there in some instances are probably not there in all instances. There's some bad news. It's really up to you. There is no recipe, there is no solution, there is no formula which works. There are recipes, solutions, and formulas which may empower people, but when they get stuck with them, they always die with them. Nothing sacred about promising. You ought to promise whatever empowers you. If promising what you can't do, and some of you are wired up like that, empowers you, then promise what you can't do. If promising what you can surely do empowers you, promise what you can surely do. But promise in a way that empowers you. The shot that the pool player is shooting for a master pool player is never the shot about which he's concerned. It is the shot 3 balls later, which he's worried about how to leave the cue ball in the right place to take the next shot, to leave the cue ball in the right place to take the shot at the ball he's worried about. What I'm trying to say is that your projects will defeat you by constraining you to the degree that you don't stay out in front of them. Don't let your projects make any demands on you. Expand the commitment so that you're always out in front of the project. See, I don't let my concern for people participating in the forum be my project. I make sure I got a project that's so big that people participating in the forum is like an obvious. You need to do that. Obviously, that's appropriate. You can never affect the results, ever. The results come after the action, and there's no affecting the results. Forget it. I know about all that stuff about feedback and no. Highly questionable. And no matter how, if I was the greatest exhorter in the world, and I could exhort you more powerfully than you've ever been exhorted before to give up your concern for the results, you'd still be concerned for the results. Why? Because the being of human beings has wired into it an already always concern for the results. In the possibility of being, you can give up the concern for the results, in fact, defeat your concern for the results. It's like putting a guy, an American, on a tennis court with a tennis racket in his hand. When that ball comes over, you can bet everything you own that sucker's going to swing at the ball. Even if you tell him, don't bother swinging at the ball, it's not necessary, we just want to see where the ball goes. He's going to swing. What there is to be concerned about is managing the showing up. For the tennis player, a concern for the ball, not for hitting the ball. And if you can put all that together, that commitment and accomplishment, you begin to get some sense of a whole where commitment and accomplishment really belong together and say something to each other and speak to each other. That commitment sets up the possibility of accomplishment, and accomplishment fulfills the possibility of commitment.
The tape you just heard was made by Werner Erhard and Associates, an education and communications enterprise which creates and delivers transformational programs. Transformation a method of inquiry into the basic questions of human existence, actually enables and empowers an individual's ability to live and work in the world in an impactful, creative, and authentic way. More than 500,000 people worldwide have participated in this inquiry since its inception in 1971. The basic course, known as the Forum, as well as courses and workshops in communication and productivity, are offered by area centers throughout the United States, Canada, Western and Eastern Europe, Asia, and Australia. For information, contact Werner Erhard and Associates at 765 California Street, San Francisco, California, 94108, or by phone at 415-391-9911. Effective Action and Accomplishment was produced by Michael Portis. The sound engineer was Don Snyder. Copyright Werner Erhard, 1985.